Hey everyone, in this video I'm going over the Essay 2 prompt and outline assignment. So, oh, that's it. So first of all, this essay is a little bit longer than the last one. Okay, so 900 to 1100 words for this one. The last one was 800 to 1000. Why did I make it 100 words longer? Because you are going to be using two secondary sources. The last essay, you only used one, and it was that secondary source that was inside the textbook. Here you have to actually do a little bit of research to choose two of your own sources. But I'm also telling you exactly where I want you to do the research, right? And that piece is important. So the prompt reads, what makes the Yellow Wallpaper a feminist short story? Based on your own analysis and two sources of criticism from the Bloom's Literature Database, which is accessed through the GTC Library website, and that is the database that I'm requiring you to use for your sources. All right, so I'm not going to be giving full credit for sources that do not come from this database. So based on your analysis and these two sources, draft a thesis that explains what makes the story, quote unquote, feminist. In doing so, avoid simply repeating definitions of feminism or feminist literature. In other words, do not give a thesis that says something like, the Yellow Wallpaper is a feminist work because it challenges the patriarchal point of view. Or, quote, the Yellow Wallpaper is feminist because it shows how gender roles can be harmful, end quote. Instead, your thesis should include details about the story and explain how this story specifically raises or addresses feminist concerns. All right. And again, this is the distinction between a generic thesis and a specific thesis. If I can take the title, The Yellow Wallpaper, out of your thesis and plug in a different title, like The Stronger, and the thesis still makes sense, at least, as a sentence, then it's too generic, right? So in other words, if what you're saying in your thesis could be said about other stories, other works of literature, then it's too generic, right? It should be something specifically revealing to us about the Yellow Wallpaper. Okay, so it should be specifically revealing the feminist nature of the Yellow Wallpaper, all right? Not just generically defining feminism in general. Generically in general is redundant. But moving on. Before deciding on a thesis, review the sources of criticism on the Bloom's Literature Database. You can access this database using the link Bloom's Literary Reference Online. Okay, so this is hyperlinked in the prompt, and to prove that, I'm clicking the link. Now, if you're doing this off campus, which you are, you will need to log in before you get to the Bloom's Literature Database, just like you did for the assignment last week. All right, when you log in, you will need your student ID number, and you will need to follow the instructions on the screen, okay, because you have to add numbers to your student ID number to actually log in. Now, if you're having trouble, if you can't find your student ID number, then you should be able to find it if you go into GTC for Me and click self-service. It used to be in Blackboard, and then I realized recently that it's no longer in Blackboard, or at least I couldn't find it anymore there. But if you click self-service, okay, and then you'll see your username up here, and you click user profile, and of course it logged me out. But if you click user profile and self-service, then you will see your ID in very small print under your name. They call it the colleague ID, or at least that's what they call it for me. So So once you get to Bloom's Literature, you can do a search. We can just start with the yellow wallpaper. Okay. And when I search for that, what I want you to do is, the first results are going to be reference results, which are going to be, a little more general. So I'd like you to start with criticism. Okay. And so you'll see a number of works here of criticism about the yellow wallpaper, including Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Again, you need to find 2 of these sources. All right. So what you want to do is read through some of them. You can get a sense from this opening paragraph. They give you the sort of an opening summary, so you can get a sense of what they're about from that summary. And once you've found your 2 sources, okay, then you can download them. You can email them to yourselves using Share. You can print them, but you're also going to need the citation. Okay, so click citation. Okay, this is the citation you want. All the citations for this assignment should end with the database information. So it should end with Bloom's Literature and then a database link. Okay, and a database link is different from a general web link. Right. So I should see that information at the end of your citation, and again, you just get it from the database, so it's easy. So you'll copy this this citation. You can paste it into your outline and eventually your essay works cited. But then don't forget, you still need to adjust the font. You still need to adjust the font and the spacing and the indentation. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip down to the works cited. So, so I copied and pasted this from, from the database. And when I did, it was single spaced. It was a different font. It did not have a hanging indentation. So I had to fix all those things. I had to make sure that the italics are preserved, because sometimes when you indent, sometimes when you paste, depending on the program you're using, sometimes those italics disappear. So if that's the case, you need to re-italicize. All right, so check the italics based on what's in the citation generator. And then when you're doing the indentation, make sure that you are using the automated indentation function of your program, okay, that you're using to write the assignment. So for example, if you're using Microsoft Word, you go into Paragraph, and then indentation is one of the options in the drop-down menu, and then you can select hanging. All right. With Google Docs, there's something similar. I don't remember it offhand, but if you, for example, Google how to change indentation in Google Docs, then you'll find clear instructions for how to do it. Right? It's not hard to figure out. You could probably figure it out just by going into the menu and doing it that way. But what you don't want to do is, for every line, try to adjust the indentation, because what happens is that when you convert it, it typically messes everything up. All right. It adds spaces that shouldn't be spaces. It doesn't indent every line, and it becomes kind of a mess. So, so once you've got your sources on your works cited, just highlight them all, and then go into indentation and adjust the indentation to hanging, and then it should, for everything that's highlighted, change that indentation. Also, make sure your works cited is aligned left and not centered. Okay, so the title, Works Cited, should be centered, but then this line should not be centered. So sometimes people just center everything, and then it looks kind of like a hanging indentation, but it's not, right? And it's clearly not a hanging indentation. So don't center your entire Works Cited page. All right. So anyway, going back into the database, Bloom's the Bloom's literature database, I would start with the yellow wallpaper as your search function. Again, go into criticism, right? Those are the articles that I really want you to find. You can add to this, right? So like, I could add, for example, let me just see how many. So I've got a lot of sources here, 16 sources. I could add feminism. All right. And and I didn't come up with any sources. Am I misspelling feminism? Possibly. Let's see. So the point being, you can add, interesting. So, you can add some terms, but that might actually limit your results, okay? And if they do limit your results, then, okay, so if I take the quotation marks off of yellow wallpaper, now I've got some sources. But, a lot of these are all really the same as before, and actually some of them are not about the yellow wallpaper at all. So, so I would not put feminism into your search engine. Okay, I would just do the yellow wallpaper. You've got, in criticism, 16 sources. They're all going to discuss to some degree, feminist concerns, even if they are not even if they don't specifically use the term feminism. All right. So find two sources that most closely discuss what you find interesting about the story. All right. Use these sources to help you articulate what you want to say in the thesis, but do not quote or paraphrase these sources for your thesis. All right. So in other words, your thesis should be something that to some degree adds to what you find in your research. All right. It should provide your own interpretation. One way to do that is to try to make your thesis a little more specific. So you might discuss how a certain idea applies to something in the story. All right. You should view yourself having a discussion with these sources. So in other words, what would you add to this conversation about the feminist nature of the yellow wallpaper? This is an idea that is in the book. This idea that you should think of yourself almost like you're sitting down to dinner with your sources, and they each have interesting things to say about the yellow wallpaper. And then what are you going to do? Are you just going to sit there and say nothing? Are you just going to repeat what they're saying and look awkward? Or are you going to find some way to add to this discussion, find some way to contribute? And sometimes, again, contributing is just saying like, oh, okay, that's an interesting idea. That also applies to this part of the story. And you can maybe go from there. One approach to drafting your thesis is to focus on a specific ambiguity in the text and explain what that ambiguity reveals about the story's feminist nature. An ambiguity in literature would be a moment where a writer makes a clear choice of uncertain significance. In other words, we know the writer has intentionally added this detail, but we can only theorize as to how the detail is important to the story as a whole. Okay. So let's move on to the outline format. Very similar to what we did for essay 1. Present your working thesis as number 1, your explanation of why the yellow wallpaper is a feminist story. It should be specific, interpretive, 1 to 3 sentences. It should explain why you're taking this position, and it should not be a question or give a list of possible reasons or examples. All right. I would rather, you give me 2 to 3 sentences than one sentence that is kind of vague or generic, or one really long sentence that tries to fit everything in. Okay, so it's a thesis statement, not a thesis sentence. All right, so 2, 3, and 4 are basically giving your examples and claims for your body paragraphs. So, 2, give your first quotation from the yellow wallpaper. So each of these should have quotations from the yellow wallpaper, followed by a correct in-text citation. Because this is a story, cite with the last name of the author and the page number. All right, so don't give line numbers or paragraph numbers, just author and page number. 2A is your claim, what this quotation reveals about your prompt and your thesis. It should be something interpretive. Okay, why is this quotation significant to your, interpretation or your thesis? Your claim, think of your claim as justifying your choice of this quotation. All right, your claim is basically answering the question, why did you choose this quotation for this essay? All right, that's what your claim should do. And then 2B, this is only required for 2 body paragraphs, a quotation from one of your secondary sources that is relevant to this quotation. And by this quotation, I mean the quotation from the yellow wallpaper, followed by a correct in-text citation. All right, so if there is an author, just cite with the last name. If there's no author, cite with the first important word of the title. All right, so a parenthetical citation should always direct us to the beginning of the entry. So typically the beginning of the entry is the last name of the author, so that's why we use the last name. But sometimes if there's no author, the beginning of the entry is the first word of the title, the first important word of the title. So that's why here we're using Gilman's and putting it in quotation marks. Okay. 3, give your second quotation from the yellow wallpaper. Okay. So basically same instructions as before. And then number 4 is optional. All right, so in other words, like the last essay, I'm only requiring 2 body paragraphs, though keep in mind, this essay has to be a little bit longer, right? So if you found you had a hard time getting over 800 words with 2 body paragraphs, then you're probably going to want to plan for a 3rd body paragraph. Okay. So if you're going to give a 3rd body paragraph, you want to also give a 3rd quotation from the yellow wallpaper. You may not necessarily provide a secondary source in this 3rd one, provided you have 2 secondary source quotations in for numbers 2 and 3. All right, but you could theoretically have 3 body paragraphs where, say, for number 2, you present a secondary source. 3, you don't, and then paragraph 4, you present your secondary source. Okay, and then 5 is works cited. Okay, and again, like I've already mentioned, this should be in a consistent font with hanging indentation, etc. Okay, all right. Thank you, and have a great weekend.